What up, though? Welcome to the FatBoy MMA podcast, where we talk about everything combat sports, but mainly MMA. If you want to hear a couple regular MMA fans talk about MMA history, notable fighters, up-and-coming fighters, and everything in between, then this is the podcast for you. Now, I should warn you, we're not professionals, but we are big fans of combat sports. Now, if that sits good with you, grab a beverage, sit back, relax, and let's go. Okay, welcome to another episode of the FatBoy MMA podcast. I am your host, DC, and unfortunately, I don't have my co-host here with me, Locke, but I have two very special guests. So I think that makes up for it, right? So, first guest I have is a returning guest. I would say, other than myself and Locke, he has been on the episode more than anyone else. So we have the returning guest, TJ.
What's up, man? Happy to be back.
Absolutely. It's always something good when you come on. And now we have another special guest, and this gentleman has never been on the podcast before. Something I did not tell him I was going to say, what you all don't know is he is Rory McDonald's most favorite fan. I'm looking at the imagery behind him. He has Rory McDonald fat heads all on his wall. So before I introduce him, just know, don't say anything bad about Rory McDonald in the comments for this show. But on a serious note, I have Arik here, and he does have a background in some grappling, some no-gi, everything like that. I'll let him go ahead and introduce himself.
Hey, I'm Arik. I have done a little bit of no-gi jiu-jitsu over at 10th Planet Orange County and now 10th Planet Mission Viejo. Earned my blue belt, which means I basically don't know anything. Thank you for having me on the show. Always happy to chat with a fellow Rory McDonald fan like yourself, you know.
Hey, blue belt, you're almost there. They say the purple is the most important one, right? What is it, blue or purple? They say is most important. That's where you learn the most.
Yeah, that's true. That's definitely true.
So on today's episode, this one, we're going to have a conversation about Amanda Nunes, but not your typical fighting conversation that we have had in the past or anything like that. Something was just announced. Of course, as we all know, she just lost her crown, in her last fight to Juliana Pena. And since losing that crown, she has decided that she is jumping camps. She's been with ATT, I think, for about 10 years now. I have to double check the notes, but I think she's been there about 10 years now. And so she's been there for a while, and she's jumping camp, but not going to like another big time, camp. She's actually decided to start her own camp, which is one of those things. She's been with them since 2015, so for about 7 years now. But so she decided she's going to start her own camp and leave ATT. And I thought this would be one of those perfect topics to talk about. Throughout the years, we've had people leave and camps for all types of reasons. Sometimes champions will leave after a loss. Sometimes fighters in general after a loss. So I actually wanted to talk about what everybody thought about Amanda Nunes leaving ATT and starting her own camp. But then also, I want to go into, after that, talking about other fighters that you may have thought about that, something pivotal happened in their career, bad or good, after leaving their long-time camp. So I actually want to throw the first question out there. I want to throw it out there to Arik, just in kind of what you think about Amanda Nunes leaving ATT, especially right after a loss.
Yeah, I think that I found it kind of interesting that she chose now to leave. I don't really fault her for wanting to leave. I think that it's important that if you are the champion and you feel like you need to make a change after a loss, you just lost your title, you feel like you need a change in order to maybe get some more focus, more attention paid to you. Like you're well within your right. We have fighters have a very limited amount of time that they're going to be in the sport and that they're going to be relevant in the sport and be able to collect those paychecks, and you got to maximize those opportunities, right? So I didn't have an issue with her leaving. I just thought it was kind of odd that there hasn't really been any details as to like, what does it actually mean that she's leaving? Like, you know, we saw, what was it, Aljo? I think Aljo moved to Vegas. So he essentially left, you know, the gym over in New York that he was training out of. But then he kept some of his coaching staff, and some of it was replaced, some of it was kept, some of it are people that he like still talks to and like, you know, talks about strategy with, and corner him and stuff like that. And so, you know, my biggest question, I guess, after this is like, is Amanda changing everything? Is she going to have an entirely new coaching staff, or is she just changing her gym affiliation? Because if it's just a gym affiliation, I don't think that it changes anything, except now she has more control over the situation, and she's going to have more attention paid to her when she's in there for her own training. And I think that's a positive thing for her.
Yeah, no, definitely good point. Before I touch on that, I want to go over to TJ and get his opinion on it.
I don't know, man. How do I follow that up? That was such an analytical breakdown. Very clean. Like, are you part of her camp? You don't want to tell us about it? No, look. I mean, you know, on every forum, on every, you know, mountaintop I can scream from, I've always felt like as these fighters are starting to get, you know, at the highest level, they're the champions and they're like the big dogs in the room. They should start looking more to that boxer model of building a camp around you and not being sort of stuck in a camp where, you know, a weekend warrior should not be in the same mats or in the same room as the champion, right? And that's something you see at some of these big franchise, you know, gyms like she was out of. I do think it's extremely concerning. You know, I hate to bring the last person that beat her into this conversation, but it's concerning when Juliana's whole argument during the lead up was, I'm hearing rumors of her having issues in her camp and she's not the best person in the camp anymore. And then you had the UFC putting a former training partner, cage side, saying this is, you know, obviously Kayla's, this is next up. She's on the line here. And, you know, you lose one belt. That's the other issue. She's still a champion of another weight class.
Right.
And you say, not only I'm leaving this camp, but I don't have a home to go to. I'm just making sure y'all know that I'm no longer part of the situation. All of those things kind of, I think it's a red flag. It's a little bit concerning. And it's somewhat like, I don't want to say absurd, but it's concerning.
Yeah, no, I think both of you all make good points. I'm gonna go in a little bit of a different direction. And I'm gonna say that her leaving this camp, especially at this time, I don't think is a good thing at all. I think maybe, as you mentioned, TJ, there were some things, you know, that may have been bubbling in the camp already. But timing is important, but not to mention, you know, I think a big part of who she became was a good fit for what I think ATT does. And if she was leaving ATT, I would need her to really go over to a mastermind that can hone what she has and build on it. Going and starting your own camp definitely does not do that, in my opinion. Um, Especially, you know, listen, people can say what they want, but we live in the world that we live in. Part of her training, she also trains with men. I think it's going to be very difficult for her to get a bunch of solid MMA men over to her own organization, you know, her own camp. Now, if you're talking about just paying somebody to bring them in, kind of like what you were saying, TJ, like a boxer would do, that's different. But to really build a camp, you know, like you know, a ATT, or, you know, name whatever, you know, camp, and to have those people that you can train with on a regular basis, that's a whole different story. And I really don't see her building that. And especially based on her skill level. Now, everybody that's a part of, you know, the our little, you know, internal fight group knows I've always been a critical of her and liked her at the same time. It's been a love-hate thing, and it's because I don't think that she's very technical. That has been my critical part. And I think now that she went up against a girl that was just as big as her, that can match her size-wise, that could also, had heavy hands, we saw what happened. Now, that doesn't mean that's going to happen in a rematch, but we know how those things work. You've been exposed now, right? So I think the big change up is a complete change in her game on a technical aspect. Diving her into maybe mixing in some counter striking, diving her into now switching it up when girls not prepared for it and doing some takedowns like Valentina did in, I believe, the fight before last, where she just came out wrestling. It was like, wait a minute, Valentina's a striker. What is this, right? So if she was going to a camp that was going to deliver something like that, I would say yes, right? And I believe this will be. She hasn't stayed with one camp. Her with AT&T has been ATT has been the longest stretch, but before that, she was with their rival MMA Masters, and before that, I think she had one or two more camps in between there. But before going to ATT, she was 9-4. Under ATT, she's 12-1. And I think ATT's really good at taking a fighter with raw talent, especially if they have heavy hands, and molding that person into a great contender. What they're not so good at, in my opinion, is really making a fighter technical or taking a technical fighter to the next level. So, in my opinion, her going to her own, starting her own camp is going to be, I don't see it as being a positive going forward under what she's trying to do. Any thoughts on kind of what I said?
Yeah, I mean, I would jump in. One thing you didn't really specify with AT&T, but you called it out about them having the ability to mold a fighter like her. But AT&T is also very much a farm system. And you see a lot of fighters. Honestly, it's weird because you say farm system like I'm saying puppy mill, but it's almost like that. But you see a lot of kickboxers, strikers, mainly from Brazil, South America, and there's a couple of European paths. I think Joanna's over there too, right? But they come in there and they learn not necessarily how to grapple, not necessarily how to wrestle, but how to defend yourself from grappling to land your strikes and to gain your strikes.
Yeah.
They don't have that this is going to sound very disrespectful, but they don't have that strategic mind of how to mold a fighter mentally and prepare them for wars. And when you watch a lot of the people, like even if you look at her last loss, her loss was a mental breakdown more so. Even as much as it was a technical breakdown, it was a mental breakdown, right? When you look at Joanna, when she struggled with Rose, it was a lot of mental issues in that fight. And that's what they're losing, or that's what she's losing, like, by staying there. So I think it makes sense for her to go, to your point, and it would make sense for her to go to another camp that can fill those holes. I just keep landing on the fact that, like, you can't say you're starting your own camp with no team, no support, no coaching staff, if that makes sense. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there is coaching staff that we just don't know about. You can't just say you're doing that and expect me to think that this is going to be a great decision.
So, Arik, anything that I said or anything that TJ said?
Yeah, I think that you touched on just kind of the training partners that she would have access to, and I think that is definitely going to be a big change for her because, when you're a member of a gym and you're going in and the other members of the gym are there available for you during, standard training, maybe not the people they're actually sparring with when you're in your own specific training camp, but the people who, you're going through practice with on a Monday through Friday basis. When that list includes, fighters like Dustin and Jorge and Joanna and all the other great fighters that are with ATT right now. I know I'm forgetting tons of them. That's got to be a pretty big change when you go over and start your own gym and you don't have all that star power and all of those, top talent fighters coming over with you. And I think that the only way she'll get access to a lot of those fighters is if she starts paying them to come in as sparring partners, which, that's definitely an option. But, we're currently witnessing contract disputes between the heavyweight champ and the UFC over making $500,000 per fight. I can't imagine that they're the women's featherweight champion and what was it, Bantamweight former bantamweight champion now. I can't imagine that she's making just such an enormous amount of money that if Francis is complaining about money, she's like, oh, I've just got so much of it I can shell out for these, high profile sparring partners. So I do wonder how the difference in talent around her is going to change her as a fighter. But I think that ultimately, if she retains her coaching staff and just has more attention paid to her, I think that's a good thing. And a lot of fighters getting a change of scenery, getting a little bit of exposure to different coaching staffs can be a positive thing as well. So I mean, I definitely agree. It's going to be weird with as far as a sparring partner goes. I just don't know that it's going to be all negative.
One thing, if I can.
Yep.
I did say that they were a farm system, and then Arik basically named all these top tier, top 10 UFC fighters. And I know we'll get flamed for that, but just one thing to acknowledge, as I say, they're a farm system in the sense of like every fighter that he named, how many of them were homegrown? They were all like, they used them basically get to that next step, get in the UFC. And then some of them were champions before they moved over. Some of them became champions. So that's when I say it's a farm league, a farm camp. I'm not saying it in a disrespectful way. I'm just saying that they aren't like your homegrown. We built this from the ground up, like Faras's camp. I forgot his actual camp name, but like
TriStar.
Yeah, TriStar.
Yeah, no, I
or
definitely.
AKA.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think you made some good points too, Arik, and even touching on what you mentioned earlier with some camps now where people bring people over and they're mergers. One person on my list for had for when we talk about other fighters that change camps and significant things. Tyron Woodley, early on he was all ATT, and then he ended up going over to Rufus Sports, but he kept at least one of his trainers from over at ATT, and then when he opened up his gym, if I'm not mistaken, it's considered an ATT affiliate. But most of his training was actually done over at Rufus Sports, so he's kind of in a hybrid. But Den Thomas and what is his name? The other gentleman that was training with him. Den Thomas stayed with him, but I don't think the other guy stayed with him. I'll think of his name later. But that's a prime example. And, I think what it was, I think he was trying to go the route of the boxing mentality to what you pointed out, TJ. And he really just wanted the best coaches for exactly what he felt like he needed. I think the only problem with him was in that situation, he had too much decision on it. And sometimes you don't know what you need. You really need a head coach mastermind. It's one of the reasons why Jackson's have always been so successful in, so many different aspects. And as you saw, as Greg Jackson got further and further away from the program, they lost a lot of that success. And it was because Greg Jackson was really that mastermind that almost acted like a sports psychologist to them at different times. And he really would put everything together for them. It wasn't necessarily all the day to day training. And I think every organization needs that because it's too hard when you're the person fighting and everything to also really see and build what you need around you. So, I think that's one of the issues that I see coming up with Amanda Nunes. But I want to move on to talking about throwing out there other fighters that either change camps right after a loss, right after a title loss, or just at a significant point in time in which they kind of, change camps where you're like, hey, this was pivotal in their career, whether good or bad. So I actually want to throw this one out to you first, TJ, and just throw out maybe one person that you have and kind of give details on what you think about the change in camps and what it did for them.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds weird, but like you always look at not coming off a loss, but you look at John Jones jumping over to why I just drew a blank. Jesus Christ. Jackson Wink, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a fighter that was coming up that changed camps. That's the typical story you hear of a guy coming from a small town camp and jumping over and making to a big time camp and sort of either swimming or failing, either being successful or failing. But then the very next one is going to be Francis. It's going to be Francis Ngannou.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he had a solid camp. Like the team out there in France, they were solid. They just didn't have a wrestling program. He suffered probably his worst defeat of his life. He goes over to Extreme Couture and like the man won to retain his belt wrestling.
Mm-hmm.
Like nobody would have thought that 3 years ago, right? But the thing that people and it's I'm gathering my thoughts as I speak, so forgive my stuttering here, but all of that is great. Yeah, he wrestled, he did that, fine. But what people weren't seeing is it wasn't a person telling him to paint by numbers, like go out there and throw combos. It's a person that stopped coaching him as a fighter and started coaching him mentally, right? And that's where when you change camps, it can't just be about getting more looks and different things. You got to get a completely different perspective on the fight game. You know what I'm saying? And that to me is like a prime example of, if you lose in a certain way where not only did you get outworked, but you got mentally broke, you have to go to another camp. But you got to make sure the camp is filling those gaps and holes, right? If Francis had said like, hey, I got money now, I'm already up there, I'm going to just get a bunch of people to come in and treat me like the big dog and, in the room, we would have never heard from Francis again.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And that's what I like to call out, right? I don't want to be too wordy here, so I'll pass it over there or back to you, Dale.
Yeah,
DC.
I'm gonna send it over to Arik, and I think you threw two good ones out. Ngannou was definitely on my list, but I'm gonna shoot it over to Arik and see who, somebody that he think that is kind of important on that list.
I think that for people who have like left camps at kind of pivotal moments of their career, Kamaru Usman comes to mind. He went over to Whitman, and I don't think anyone expected him to beat Jorge striking in the second match, and he went out there and starched him like it was nothing. Made a meme out of him. And that's not the Kamaru we saw, back in the day when he was over with Black Zillions. I know that he his training situation is a little bit different because he was with Black Zillions and then they folded, and I forgot where he went after that. I think Sanford MMA, and then left Sanford for
I think
Whitman's
Sanford,
program,
because I forget his name, but he was their striking coach over at Black Zillions, and so basically when Black Zillions kind of folded, everybody just went over there with him.
Yeah. And so, training under Trevor Whitman, it seems like he's really developed his striking during that time, which is great to see. And then another person that I think of, and it's kind of similar to the Aljo situation, is Joseph Benavidez. And I don't think it was really like a pivotal moment of his career, but I do think it was kind of an important decision that he made. He had went from alpha male to, I think it was like Elevation, and then he left Elevation for like Extreme Couture. And then they don't really talk about, I don't think there was anything about him like leaving Extreme Couture, but I think what he started to do was put together his own camps. That's actually something I thought we were going to see more fighters doing with the introduction of the PI, was that everyone was going to, go to Vegas. It's cheap to live there, and you have access to this world-class facility, and that they would just spend the time flying in the sparring partners and the coaches that they wanted to coach them, because, with the cost of living being so cheap and with everything else, all the access to the PI being free for you, I thought that would be something that could possibly elevate a lot of fighters. As far as I know, Joseph Benavidez is one of the first and one of the only fighters to actually take full advantage of that system and to go out to a place like Vegas, where the MMA scene is so saturated, and then be able to get training, on every block essentially, and learn from all these different minds. I think it's kind of a lesson. It's similar to like the Overeem situation, how Overeem jumped from camp to camp to camp to camp. It's like
To camp.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a lot of geniuses out in the MMA world. It's like you can learn how to be a great striker from Whitman, or you can learn how to be a great striker from Jason Perillo, or you can learn how to be a great striker from both of them. You know what I mean? And it doesn't seem like enough MMA fighters are taking full advantage of that as an opportunity, either because maybe it's too cost prohibitive, or maybe time constraints, or this like weird thought that you have to be loyal to like one coach and one system. But I think his approach was the right one.
Yeah, I think with that system, the issue is that the way it is, especially in MMA, everything's kind of tied into one. It's like if you think about the music industry, it's like you're in a damn 360 contract, right? So most of these guys, their training camp, their management, and everything outside of the UFC is tied all into one. Everything outside of the UFC is kind of tied all into one, you know? So I think that causes some issues. The Black Zillions is a prime example of that, where when they had that, I forget the guy's name that was over that. He actually passed away, but I think his name was
Glenn
Greg.
Robinson.
Glenn, yep, that's what it was. Yep. And yeah, he was the management, and what he was trying to put together, I think, was absolutely phenomenal. Now, unfortunately, once the Reebok deal came with with the UFC, it would have all folded anyway. But what he was trying to build was not just management in house, but build products, clothing line, everything else in house. And now all of the fighters have ownership in it and get a piece of that, right? So even if you're up and coming and you don't have the big sponsors yet, you have some type of revenue just by being a part of camp, and that paying some of the fees and everything else. So his idea, I think, was brilliant. But nowadays it would only work outside of the UFC, right? But some of the fighters, I'll touch on two fighters. One, I'll touch on Travis Brown. I think when Travis Brown, now granted, he wasn't the champion, I get it, but I think it was very pivotal when he left camps. He was over at Jackson Winks, and I believe he was over at Alliance before that, but kind of combined out there, he went 16, 2 and 1. And then, after a loss to Fabricio Verdum, he decided, and from what a lot of people said, of course, Ronda had a lot of influence on that. He was in love at the time. He decided to go out to Glendale. And I remember him doing an interview, and he was talking about how much he learned and how he never realized all these years of training he didn't actually know how to throw a punch. And I forget the guy's name. T- Started with a T. Taverdian. I forget his name. The trainer out there at Glendale. But you know, he said that basically. But so he ended up saying, "Hey, I didn't even know how to throw a punch, and now like I've learned all these skills and I'm ready to go display it." And under Glendale, he went 2 and 3. And sometimes what you what somebody didn't teach you is there for a reason based on what you already do naturally, right? I remember when John Jones was first coming up, and I remember talking to my cousin about this, and it's actually something I mentioned in a group before. And I was saying John Jones, when it was him, Ryan Bader, um, what is his name? Shoot, I forget his name. The guy with the pink shorts. Um, you know, Rashad Evans, all these guys kind of coming up around the same time. And I was talking about John Jones and how everything I saw in him was special compared to them. But he was actually the most raw. But in his rawness, I felt like they were doing the right things by not handicapping him. There were certain things that he did that just wasn't necessarily right, but it didn't matter because it was right for him. And as a coach, you need a special coach to be able to see that and see, okay, this person may not be doing something exactly right, but it's very effective for them and how they fight. I don't want to change that. But the things that are not right and the areas where I feel like we could have great improvement, that's what I want. And changing the way that Travis Brown was punching, I don't think was the right thing that was needed in the heavyweight division at all at that time. Especially when you're talking about your simple jab crosses. No, don't change that. Like there's so many other things that could be worked on, and you spend all this time working on that, right? Now I'm about to throw something out here. that nobody would ever put out here except for me. Okay? So, Johnny Hendricks. Now, I tried to find this video that I watched maybe 2 years ago that was breaking down Team Takedown and kind of showed and talked about the coaches and the transition and everything that actually happened with Team Takedown. I thought Team Takedown was Johnny Hendricks' team, but it wasn't. He joined that team. And going back to what I said before, it was one of those situations where him joining Team Takedown and kind of everything being built around him, they were kind of like management, and I think they had some jujitsu and some other stuff, but they were not like a full MMA camp like that. But then they built everything around him, but he wasn't the owner or anything of that. It wasn't his, right? But they had great coaches, great wrestling coaches, striking coaches, everything like that. And then something happened in the back office that was more a business or money decision. And they pretty much got rid of all the coaches. Then also he's going through things that he went through with not working with Dolce. And literally before all of that happened, he went 17-3, right? After that happened, he went 1-5. So I know we all know the talks about USADA and how that plays and everything like that, which I think what Johnny Hendricks touched on about USADA, I could believe it's plausible. And basically what he said was before he was used to dramatically dehydrating himself and having extreme weight cuts. And he could recover because IVs were allowed. And he had been doing that forever. And when USADA came in, it wasn't just the drugs that they got rid of. You couldn't rehydrate through IV. And I know that's a big thing in boxing also. So I think that's plausible as one of the things. Now, I'm not saying whether he was or was not on drugs, but I do think if you take any great fighter in their prime, kind of going back and forth, they're at the top already, fighting the who's who, and you change their entire camp, that's going to be devastating almost to anybody. And he ended up leaving Team Takedown and trying to do what we talked about, where he kind of grabbed a coach from here, grabbed a coach from there, and tried to put together his own thing. But I just don't think it ever worked. So those are the two that I would throw out there. So anybody that has any rebuttals on anybody else, or if it's any other, fighters that you also want to throw into this conversation.
I got two things, if you don't mind, Arik.
Just don't say
You
nothing
caught
bad
out
about Johnny Hendricks.
who? Um, you caught out Usman, and it's funny. I didn't think of him in that sense because I don't necessarily know if he left a camp as much as his camp dissolved, and he was sort of a wandering warrior, for lack of a better word, until he found a home. So that's a great shout out. Two, USADA is a fictional organization that doesn't exist. Three, I was shocked nobody called out Davison Figueredo, or Figs as I like to call him. Him retaining his championship, going over to Henry Cejudo's camp now. I think that's kind of a prime example of a guy that had a great, phenomenal camp that was teaching him how to fight. He knew what to do, but they had no nutritional value or, understood the basics of you can fight, but this is how you fight at a championship level and get to there. And while I still think Brandon won that fight, I don't even know when this is dropping, but
Definitely
Brandon
won
won
that
that
fight.
fight. And yeah, exactly. I still have to commend what Henry Cejudo's camp was able to do with Figs by one, changing his body type within a 3 month, was 3 months at least. I mean, since that first fight, or the second fight rather, not only changing his body type, but teaching him how to, work with that body, and also mid-fight game planning to keep him in the mix. Man still couldn't take Brendan's punches. Every time Brendan landed a punch, he reacted as if he got hit by a truck. I know he didn't fall on his back, but it was kind of interesting to watch that. But those are my two sort of observations I want to throw out of there based off of what you guys just said.
No, good comments. And I will say this: the only thing I'll say about Usman that I'll disagree with you some there, TJ. I agree that originally his camp dissolved, but he definitely went over to Sanford with all the rest of those guys. But I think it was one of those things where it was almost like one of those John Jones type situations where you know that your training partner is coming up, and it's going to be a situation where it's going to come down to, okay, we're going to fight each other, who's going to be with who. And I think he saw some of that coming and said, I could actually go over here and get some other things and train with a guy like Justin Gaethje that's not in my weight class, so I don't have that immediate worry, right?
Yeah.
But get some really good work in at a good camp. And now when the next guy comes up from this camp for my title, I'm ready for anybody. And I think it played out well, in that situation. And yeah, I think the Figueiredo move was good. And what was important about that, of course, is because Henry Cejudo, I think, was like kind of an indirect mentor at one point in time to Moreno. So it wasn't just the camp; it was him kind of adding information in, knowing certain things about his student, and then stuff like that adds to the mental game of kind of a fighter. But I'll let you jump in there, Eric, for anything you were going to say.
Yeah, just I think that one of the reasons that Figueredo training with Cejudo didn't really hit the radar is just because there was no like announcement he left his gym necessarily, just that he was training with Henry. So like I don't know if he's leaving his gym or not. One of the things I find interesting, I've talked about it in like the group before, but one of my old strength coaches when I was in college out in New Mexico became one of the strength conditioning coaches over at Jackson Wink for a little bit, and now his brother is one of the guys who trains John Jones, or used to at least. I don't know if they're still working together. Um, John left Jackson Wink to go to, was it Fight Ready? And from my understanding, isn't Fight Ready like some kind of affiliate with Jackson's anyways? Or am I
Well, I
mistaken
think
there?
I'm not sure if they're affiliate, but I know they're in the original location of Jackson Wink. So when Jackson Wink got big and they moved to that other location, this spot bought that location. But you're right, they may be affiliate. I'm not sure, but I know it's the original Jackson Wink location.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know if they actually are one or not. I thought they were. And so what I was going to say is my former strength and conditioning coach has talked about how he has, I think it's his father-in-law is one of Figueredo's trainers. So my assumption was that Figueredo was like just going over to an affiliate where he was going to have access to like a little bit of a different look and gain access to Cejudo. And I thought that that played into like the mental warfare aspect more than like the skills, especially when you look
Hmm.
at how the fight played out and how Fight Week played out. It seemed like he really wanted to get into Moreno's head.
Hmm.
And then when they actually fought, it's not like he went out there and started shooting like blast doubles or like inside trips or something that you'd be like, oh shit, he picked that up from Cejudo. Like there it is. Instead, it just like it didn't look that different from their previous encounters to me from like where the fight took place, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think the difference maker in the judges' eyes were those knockdowns. I didn't even check to see who the judges were, but it was more like they were judging a boxing match versus an MMA fight, which, we know forever this has been an issue. I don't know if it'll ever change, but boxing rules for MMA, we've seen time and time again, it's a problem, right? Because a guy getting knocked down does not win a round in MMA the way that it does in boxing. It's not an immediate point, but it was almost like that's how they had to judge it to give that to Figueredo, right? Because even if you're judging it and you want to make that knockdown a high point, you scored a round even because Moreno's winning that whole round and then gets knocked down toward the end. If anything, you scored even, right? So I think that was kind of the problem with the scoring in that fight. Not to go too far on a tangent, but I agree with everything you said about the Cejudo.
Yeah, I didn't realize Cejudo was in his camp until I think it was either Wednesday when I like caught one of the behind the scenes videos. But like, I honestly did not know he was in his camp. And then at first I was like, it's a different look. And then when I saw him in the corner, that's when I was like, oh, he's in a whole new camp. So yeah,
Yep. So anybody else you all want to throw out? If not, I got a couple questions for you.
those are all top level. I mean, Joanna going to ATT
Actually, I have
is
to talk
one.
about that one, but go ahead.
Okay. No, you go. I was just gonna say, I was gonna just touch on it. Like, her going over there was interesting. I don't know if I 100% think it worked the way she wanted it to work, but I also know she was going through a lot of personal and mental things when she made that jump. That I'm hoping she's out of it. But that's one other one I will call out. And then I don't. What do we? If I can ask the group, where do we stand on the GSP sort of late in his career run when he was, between Faraz and Jackson Wink?
I think he was always pretty much between those two counts. Didn't they have like some type of almost like affiliate agreement? Because I think they always trained with each other, but
I thought it was
maintained it being a
for
separate account. I mean, separate camps.
Yeah, I thought that affiliation really only came because of GSP. Like,
Hmm.
and again, this is the one where you can check my MMA history here. But I always thought he started at for Ross, and then it was either the first Matt Hughes loss, I want to say, or somewhere in there where he went to Wink.
Hmm.
And even though he mainly trained at for Ross's, but Wink was his corner, so it's like, does that count as jumping camps, or like, I don't know, is that just one of those weird hybrids?
I think
Good
that
question. Good question. Go
I
ahead.
think that with GSP, what's kind of interesting about it is that like Frost was always considered his head trainer, and then he just I think he had already trained at Henzo's, if I'm not mistaken, before he even went over to TriStar, or maybe he started off at TriStar and then went over to Henzo's for Jiu-Jitsu, but was still with TriStar. And so GSP kind of had that for the entirety of his career, where like not everything was through one gym. Um, and then after that, I think it was after he lost one of the mats. I'm not entirely sure which one, and I'd have to go back and check. But there's like that iconic picture where they're all wearing like Affliction shirts in his corner, where it's you got Faraz and Jackson and John Danaher and
And Phil Nurse.
Phil Nurse. I always forget his name, and I feel bad because I'm like, he deserves the shine that the rest of them get, but I just never
Yeah.
remember the name.
Nobody, unless you're a real like MMA head, I don't think if anybody ever seen him or anything, they would have no idea who he is. So yeah, so I'm gonna touch on Joanna, and so I think her decision to leave, I think she went to the wrong camp, and that's the issue. Her leaving, I think some of her issues actually had to do with, if I'm not mistaken, one of the people in management or something in her camp. And then also, I think she really wanted to come and train in the US. But it's something very significant with um, classically trained fighters in certain disciplines. And one of those disciplines, I believe, is that Dutch style kickboxing. In my opinion, and as always, I have no problem telling people I'm biased, right? But in my opinion, for MMA, Dutch style kickboxing is what I've seen to be one of the most effective styles to cross over into MMA when you compare whether it's American kickboxing, Muay Thai, whatever else, Dutch style. And her original training, and of course we know she was a kickboxer first or Muay Thai, whatever you want to, depending on what organization she was fighting in. Her training started under Ernesto Hoose's team, which for people that may not know or know the world of kickboxing, he was like considered the goat, of goats for a long time, and pretty much kept fighting pretty late in his career. But some of the things that we see now with leg kicks and everything that people just see as the thing or the style, a lot of that started with him. And he was one of my favorite kickboxers back in the day. Now, I didn't start watching him until he was already a little older by the time I got into kickboxing, but he was still a powerhouse. And if you want to see a crazy, ridiculous fight, go and watch him versus Bob Sapp. It's ridiculous. But saying that to say, her style was very much like you can tell she came from a camp like that. And her style was devastating, especially because in women's MMA, particularly at the lower weight classes, nobody had that type of striking. Nobody was close. And she blew everybody out of the water. And then I believe it was after the first Claudia Gadea fight, or first or second, that's when she changed and went over to ATT. And from that point on, you started to see her striking slip. She doesn't throw nearly the amount of elbows. Before she would hit you with every single thing she had. Now it's more striking, and she's throwing hands, and it completely changed her style, and it goes back to something I mentioned before. I don't feel like, and I could be wrong, but I don't feel like ATT does a great job if they have a very technical fighter, taking that fighter, maintaining those skills and building on it. I think they do a lot better with raw talent to build up that raw talent. So I feel like she took a step backwards. If anything, she should have went to a camp that at least had a coach that really was training that style, that can help her with a little bit more footwork and some wrestling. Maybe Bang Muay Thai would have been a good transition, be it that one, there's a lot of people in that camp, although they're males, would have been more her size. But two, as we know, Dwayne Ludwig was trained in Dutch style under what is his name? The guy that does the splits, the Dutch guy. Um, I'll think of his name later. So we know he was trained in that style, so he understood it. He understood what not to take away from her and what to enhance. And I think it would have been a very, very much a better placement for her than going over to ATT. But in general, I think it was a bad move for her. And just for a note, before she went to ATT, she was 12-0. At ATT, she's 4-4.
Jesus. Wow.
Any thoughts on that before we move on, or anything else you all want to throw out before we move on to a couple questions? And then pretty much we're
Yeah,
going to
I mean,
wrap it up.
sorry, I didn't mean to talk over
Nope,
you.
go ahead.
Are we, and maybe this is part of your questions, but are we talking about just why it's not good for certain fighters to move, jump around? Like you called out Overeem going camp to camp to camp to camp to camp. I've always had a theory that, like, while it's good to get different looks, you have to be careful because eventually your style gets so spread around the industry that no matter where you go, people will tell you, yeah, these are all his weakness, and it becomes very,
Hmm.
transparent. And one, again, USADA, the fiction organization that is out there, um, you can make all the arguments that he slipped because of the drugs or the enhancement, but I also wonder if, like, there became a certain point where it was a blueprint to train for him, and everybody followed that blueprint because all of his defeats came pretty much in the same sort of style. Like, people knew what his deficiencies was, right? So I'm wondering if, what do you guys think on that? Then I'll shut up.
Go ahead, Eric. You want to dive in on that
Yeah,
one?
I think that you definitely got to tread carefully when you are bouncing from camp to camp, but I think that I look at it as kind of like the Bruce Lee approach to martial arts, where like you learn everything that you can and you just discard all the useless shit that doesn't apply to you or doesn't help you. And I think that for some people, they're gonna have an easier time doing that than others. And unfortunately, in the fight game, in MMA specifically, it's the process of finding that out can be very costly. If you go into a fight and you don't entirely know what's going to work best for you and what's not, and you're still testing these things out, and you haven't had a chance to have like a full camp with these new skills in your arsenal, then yeah, you're probably going to run into some problems. I think with Overeem, I think he's done a good job of picking up what he can from where he can. But I definitely agree that there are fighters who they make a change and you start to see that they're not really learning anything, or they're not developing any new skills, and that I think is when it becomes very problematic to bounce from camp to camp.
Yeah, no, I can agree with both of those. I think another big problem with bouncing around is that, once again, going back into the scenario I mentioned earlier, you want to tweak a fighter, not completely change a fighter, right? So that would be like Francis Ngannou going over to um, Extreme Couture, and they completely change all of his striking. That doesn't make sense. Why would you do that? The striking is working for him right now. Now that doesn't mean you don't tweak things in the striking, but the striking is working. But what you can do is at the wrestling. And that's where you also bring in Usman to your camp and everything like that. And going into something both of you all mentioned, kind of the head game. And I apologize, I forget his who was acting as his head coach over at Extreme Couture, but I think he did a good job, especially on the sideline, kind of things he called out to him, everything like that. But I think those things are important. So when you're bouncing around, you don't get the right consistency to tweak and build on what you have. You get a lot of people trying to change you, and I think that ruins you. So we don't have much longer left. I'm going to throw out two questions. You can answer both of them, or you can answer one of them, either one. Now, the first one is, who do you think should have changed camps but did not change camps? First question. Second question is, who do you think needed to change camps? They did change camps, but they went to the wrong camp. And I can repeat both of those once again for you all. First question is, who do you think should have changed camps but didn't? They just stayed with a camp too long, too loyal, whatever else. And
Hmm.
who do you think needed to change camps? It was a good decision. They did change, but then they went to the wrong camp. Whichever one of you all want to hop on it first, or I'll pick somebody.
I'm gonna let Arik have it because it's taking me. I got to think that one through.
Okay. You can answer one or both of them, either one.
I'm trying to think of an answer for the first one, but for the second one, I think that the easiest answer is Kevin Lee, and Kevin Lee, he is another person who left a camp under. It was a different set of circumstances. I can't remember the coach's name, but his coach, passed away, and he was kind of left to figure out where to go from there. And he went to a couple different places. I know he wound up at TriStar for some amount of time, but we've seen him just not look good ever since the loss to Tony Ferguson. Like, he's had flashes of brilliance, but for the most part, he's kind of just. I mean, he's at Eagle FC at this point, and I'm a big Khabib guy, and I'm hoping that Eagle FC is a really dope promotion and everything. I hope that they have all the success in the world, but ultimately, like, as of right now, I don't even know if it's a B-list promotion without the fact that Khabib's name, carries a little bit. So to see Kevin Lee wind up there, I think that's an indication that clearly something went wrong in his career, and maybe he should have been more selective with his camp choice. Personally, I thought, and I'm going to be biased here, and I know that I am. I thought it'd be great to see him training out of 10th Planet Las Vegas. Coach Casey Halstead out of there.
That's not biased at all. Calling the coach name out and everything.
Yeah, he's I feel like he serves a similar
You already
role.
got your blue belt, right?
Yeah, exactly. I don't need to kiss ass anymore because I got my blue belt. No, but I think that he's as good at motivating people as he is at coaching them, and I think that that's what Kevin Lee needed. Is he needed someone to help keep him on the right path and help keep his head high, especially after he was taking loss. I mean, he looked like he was just absolutely devastated when he lost to Iaquinta. I think that was the second time, and like, I don't know. I feel like having been in Casey's classes before and having listened to how he speaks to his athletes, he's the kind of person who's not going to allow you to get down on yourself and who's not going to allow you to take any time off. You know what I mean? I feel like it would have been good for him, but I don't know if we'll ever find out. I know he's trained there before, but I'd like to see him do like a full camp with Casey in his corner.
No, I think that was a good one. I didn't think about that one at all. TJ, you want to go? If you don't have anything yet, I can go and give you all
Yeah,
a
I
little
mean,
bit more time.
sorry, if I dug deep into my geekdom of MMA, I could come up with a bunch of names. I got one that's a little bit controversial, and everybody will say I'm crazy, so I'll save that for the end. But I think one that stands out to me the most is in terms of changing camps, but going to the wrong camp is Cody Garbrandt. Um, I still think he's a high level fighter. He's in a situation where he doesn't know, or he's not being taught to fight anymore, right? Like I get the whole high head situation. I get the whole if you can put him in a gunfight, you can shoot him in the face. You know what I'm saying? Like he's that guy. But I feel like he left Team Alpha Male, lost his ability to not only choose his striking, but his footwork, his movement, and everything else. And he's gone to so many different camps where he's not really being challenged. I think something like a Jackson Wink would have done him well. Honestly, I think even if he'd went up there with Ross, he would have done well. AKA probably would have done him well. And he's one of those guys that I think of. Not a fan of his, not gonna lie, but it stands out. In terms of needing to change camps to cross that next level, a little bit far fetched here, but I think Derek Lewis. I think he knows how to fight. He knows how to box. He has the power. Honestly, I think he needs something like an AKA to just put him in his corner to take him to that next level. Otherwise, he's going to be a gatekeeper to the championship, to that top 3, top 5 championship. And then lastly, controversial, Max Holloway. I think the only thing, Max Holloway to me is one of the greatest 145s ever. I know he's a winning 145er, and I know everybody loves him and we love him. But I do think there's something, he needs another look from a high level coach. And you guys call out his coach name if you can think of it, but I can't think of it at this point. I think he needs a high level coach to make him unbeatable, and that's what he's missing. Those are my thoughts.
No, I like those. I did not know that Cody Garbrandt had changed camps. But I would say a person like him needed to go over to Trevor Whitman. And the reason why I say that is because if you look at, you know, Justin Gaethje is not that big of a difference of the type of hothead personality. And I think Trevor Whitman did a really good job of reeling him in. And I think we talked on one of the episodes before about kind of, when he came over, and I think he went 0-2, like his first 2 fights in the UFC. And it was, Trevor Whitman kind of getting him out of that brawler mentality and getting him over to being because he's a really good striker, but it's one of those things, how you have some guys, if they get hit, they just want to go crazy and I have to hit back, and all strategy, everything we worked on goes out of the window. And I think Garbrandt is one of those guys. I think he finishes TJ in that fight if he had more control. I forget if it was the first or I think he hurt him in both fights, but when you're a hothead and you all of a sudden get hit or something, you just go off the plan. It's a whole different scenario. But I'll give my answers to those. So as far as the person I think that should have changed camps but didn't, Frankie Edgar. I think he's a very, very loyal guy. I would have actually loved to see him go over to AMC Pancration, which is where DJ and Bibiano Fernandez, a guy that's not in the UFC, but I think was a UFC caliber fighter. He's over in one right now. Guy that I really like. I think between those guys, what they do, footwork, what Matt Hume kind of does with those guys, I think could have been good for Frankie Edgar. His issue is I think he has the exact same style that he's always had, and it's too easy to train for now. There's too much footage, everything like that. And I think he could have gotten some really good tweaks training with. I know DJ's smaller than him, but training with DJ and Bibiano and being under the tutelage of Matt Hume, I think really could have tweaked him. But that group of guys over there, he's out of Almeida Jiu Jitsu, very loyal group of guys. I don't think he would ever leave. I think he would retire first. His guys, the guys that train over there with Matt Serra, and they're all kind of a larger group, but they're in individual camps, right? But all of their guys are pretty loyal. I know Arik mentioned Funk Master as being a person that kind of start doing some stuff out in Vegas or whatever. But still tied, to that camp. And as far as a person that I think needed to change camps, did but went to the wrong camp, Tyron Woodley. I kind of mentioned he changed but didn't change. He should have went to TriStar. I think the issue was he had his mind so set on one day he was going to fight GSP. He really just didn't see what was coming up behind him. And the reason TriStar is because one of the things that TriStar has always been good at to me is taking wrestlers and helping them understand how to mix their striking and wrestling. This is something I always said about Woodley. And then what comes along to take over the 170 division? All guys that know how to mix up their striking and wrestling. And all of a sudden, he couldn't touch any of them. And he really should have been preparing and watching those guys coming up and being out there training with, I don't know if Rory's still out there, but training with some of those big welterweights and learning to mix it up because it's not like he doesn't have both. Now, how much more powerful also is your counter punching when every time you flinch, a guy doesn't know if you're going to throw a quick jab or take him down, or if you're trying to bait him in to throw a punch so you can counter. You become a lot more unpredictable. And the problem is he was very predictable and easy for those big welterweights to just have their way with him. So I'll let you all dive into anything that's a rebuttal or anything else that you may want to add to either of those questions, and then we're going to wrap it up.
Um, yeah, I think that it's funny that you mention going over to AMC, just because that's kind of someone I thought of as someone who I kind of thought should leave camps is DJ, and it's less to do with his development as a fighter and just a little bit to do with like how his career has panned out. So he obviously didn't get along with UFC brass, and I don't know if that's a matter of like the management that he had or if it's a matter of like the coaching situation around him. I just think that maybe a different mind being a part of his camp maybe could have helped him navigate that a little bit better, so that he would have stayed in the UFC in the twilight of his career rather than going over to ONE FC. Not that that's like that big of a deal. I think if he's getting paid and he's making good money, good for him. But the other thing is just people used to comment on the relationship he had with his coach Matt Hume, where they would say that it was almost like playing a video game, where like Matt Hume is like just shouting instructions to DJ, and he's just doing all of these things like on command in the moment, better than you ever see a fighter be able to like pay attention to instructions and implement them in real time. And so he goes over to ONE FC, and because Matt Hume's a vice president there, he's all of a sudden not allowed in his corner, and it's like, I just don't know that you mess with the formula that won you a championship and had you become, have you break the record for most title defenses. I don't know if you take that and you make changes like that this late in your career without it being a little bit of a more grand change where you're adopting a new head coach that has the same level of like intelligence and brilliance and maybe familiarity with your game as someone like Matt Hume. I have to imagine that if he had a mind like the Trevor Whitmans and Jason Perillos of the world, that maybe he has a little bit more success at ONE FC. Not that he hasn't been successful, but I mean, we did just see him get knocked out not that long ago.
He did fight a giant too, you got to admit.
No, that's definitely very true.
That wasn't like a regular Adriano. He's like, he easily could be like a 55er, easily. Yeah. He's a big dude.
Yeah.
I thought I was being like hyperbolic when I was saying the dude could be a 155.
No, he absolutely could be.
and he caught him with something that DJ just down to his genetics is not used to looking out for, which is you're getting up and the guy flies and knees you in the face. Like, I'm not taking it away from him, but like he spent the better part of his career not having to worry about that. So it's
Yeah, I think you made really good points. So Arik, and the only thing I'll say is under AMC Pancration, in my opinion, he has one loss, and that's to Dominic Cruz at a higher weight division. I don't think he lost that Cejudo fight. We saw what he did to Cejudo the first time. He came into that fight with a messed up knee. You can say it was close, but I just don't see Cejudo, and I've watched it back more than once. I don't see Cejudo winning that, but I also think that DJ, going back to kind of what you said about kind of, his beef with the UFC, I think the issue was more not necessarily a beef, but the UFC they're terrible at promoting fighters that's not of your loudmouth, say anything to get attention. Like, who have they really done a good job at promoting that was not that person, other than maybe GSP, and they really never had to promote GSP because he had all of Canada behind him. But who's like a regular guy? Do you think they would have ever been able to promote a Oscar De La Hoya, a golden boy that didn't talk trash or anything like that, that was always showing up in suits and stuff before anybody? They don't know what to do with him. So they had a whole audience they could have tapped in with DJ, because the nerd movement is on the rise. The video game movement is on the rise. He's a big Twitch guy. They're like, we don't know what to do with this little short 125 nerd. That's what it came down to. And that's why Henry Cejudo came out with the persona of Triple C, to try to bring, craziness to that division. And all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, it's great. Right? But I don't think it was DJ. And, up to, the Adriano fight, I only really have him losing to Dominic Cruz.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that my main thing with him, with the reason I think he should have switched camps, more so had to do with just the relationship with his coach, and his coach not being able to be in his corner. And I know that
Good
he has
point.
other coaches that are like super familiar with him. I just don't, you know, is the guy who's second in command over at AMC Pancration, is he as brilliant as a Whitman is? Because if he is, I don't know why he doesn't have his own gym with his own champions. You know what I mean? So, I mean, to be fair, I'm not familiar with the AMC Pancration and their coaching staff and what their accomplishments are outside of DJ. I think that he maybe would have benefited from having someone who's a little bit more well known in his corner once he moved to ONE FC and couldn't have Matt Hume in his corner anymore.
Yeah, the only thing I would say there is just, probably don't want to change camps, and then your head guy is the president too. You think you fought a big guy there, they they have you fighting 170-pound fighters. Anything else from you, TJ, before we wrap it up?
No, I was just gonna say, Eric, that's a great call out and like the breakdown of DJ. I never thought about it like that, so I think that's a brilliant call out there. That's all I have.
Okay, great. So, um, you know, for everybody, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of fighters that we missed. There's some things we're going to think about afterwards. Say, oh man, I should have mentioned this person or whatever else. But if you could think of anybody, somebody that changed camps after a loss, somebody that should have changed camps, whatever else, just go ahead and drop us a message on any of our social medias. Let us know. And it might be something that brings up a conversation for us to talk about it next time. But I want to thank our two guests. Of course, we had TJ, the returning champion, more times than anybody else. And then, of course, we had Arik on here. And, he brought up some really great points, hit from a few different angles that I didn't think of. And I want to thank you both. Any last words from you?
Just thank you for having me on, and wanted to give a shout out to 10th Planet Orange County and 10th Planet Mission Viejo, as well as Joseph Soul, who is the guy who got me into the Facebook group that we're all a part of, which is, where we met and started talking about our love for Rory McDonald.
Anything else from you, TJ?
I'm usually really bored on Sunday, so if you don't agree with my opinion, drop it in the comment section. I'll get in there and get dirty with you guys. So, I didn't even realize we were on YouTube. Now that I know, it's on.
Side note to that, I know I was supposed to be wrapping it up, but that whole conversation I was having with somebody on YouTube, the whole thing got erased. I don't know if he did it or if YouTube took it down, but I was so upset. The entire
That sucks.
conversation got erased. Of course, I have
Boo.
screenshots, and maybe I'll put them up at some point. But
I was about to create because my YouTube account is attached to my Google. I was about to create another account just so I could go in there.
Well, I want to thank everybody for listening. This wraps up another FatBoy MMA podcast. Come back and listen to the next one. Thank you. That wraps up another FatBoy MMA podcast. If you have a topic for us, please email us at fatboymma55@gmail.com or reach out to us on social media by going to links.fatboymma.com. That's links.fatboymma.com. Thank you for listening.
Just see